Hi, and welcome at the Java Performance Pitfall about improper use of XML and remoting. My name is Pitfall Bakker. Today we're going to discuss the pitfalls and best practices of XML. We're going to have a look at remote calls with XML. We're going to see what alternatives are there for XML. Also we look at JSON, the use of heavy objects. And also we look at some of the date bindings in JAXB. In an enterprise environment, we see a lot of use of XML over SOAP, either over JMS or over HTTP. And we see in performance testing that these remote calls are very heavy performance-wise. The XML object binding takes lots of resources like CPU, and it also takes time. So we advise to use binary protocols where available. You can think of the proto buffers by Google. You can have a look at the hashing protocol or recently the thrift protocol. Sometimes also, if you're communicating from a Java application to another Java application, you can even consider the use of RMI. Sometimes custom protocols are available that are also binary, and that can save you a lot of processing power. If you are using XML, you can also consider JSON. We have found in load testing that JSON is already better than XML. Now, if you are using XML, it's important that you look at the sizes of the messages. If you have messages that contain 200 elements, but you're only using 20 of them, make sure that you reduce the message size to only those 20 elements. This will save you processing power. In a lot of cases, we see where internal systems communicate via XML. They use also validation. And validation is like XML parsing, a heavy process. So if you are testing with XML and the validation is correct, you can disable the validation process in production because you already tested that the semantics and the content of the XML is okay. If you are receiving XML messages from outside of your organization, it's still advisable to do the validation, of course. Another pitfall we see regularly with code reviews is that JAXBContext are created for each request. And JAXBContext objects are expensive, so it's better to reuse them. And you can reuse them because these objects are thread safe. Also, we advise to register multiple classes in one JAXB context and not create a JAXB context for every single class. This will save memory. Be aware that the objects you will get from the JAXB context, like the marshaller and the unmarshaller and validator, are not thread safe and should not be used by multiple threads. Here's an example of how to use the JAXB context as a single final static object. It's being initialized using a static initializer. And here you also see the use of two classes being registered in one JAXB context. So you only need one context for the both objects. When you're using JSON, there's a similar object to create messages in JSON. It's called the ObjectMapper. And a bad practice is that the ObjectMapper is created in every method call. The ObjectMapper is thread safe, so you can also use this as a static field. Here's an example of some code where the ObjectMapper is used in a find method. You can see that in the find, the ObjectMapper is created each time, and that will cost resources, so it's better to move this to a static method, to a static object. Back to XML, there are a lot of factory in new instance methods that will create objects for you. These new instance methods are heavy in performance because every time you call the new instance, it's going to search your file system for the jar, and it's going to look into the jar to see what configuration is available, so it can instantiate a correct implementation. So it's better not to do this too often. So you might want to consider reusing them, but be aware that these objects are not thread safe. So you should either put them in the thread local or use some other means to avoid thread corruption. Here's best practice. If you're using these factories, you can give these arguments to your JVM to say which implementation to use. That way, every time you create a new instance, it does not look up the implementation from the file system. Beware that this is used for the whole JVM, so you really need to test if this works for you. When using XML and you are providing dates in fields, then the standard way to parse dates is with the XMLGregorianCalendar. The XMLGregorianCalendar object is a large object, and also here you see to create an XML calendar object, you need to call the new instance on the data type factory. And like we saw in the previous slide, this is an expensive method, so better not use this. This is an example from the code where we see that there's a build XML date method, and every time this is called, the new instance method is called, a new XMLGregorianCalendar is created, and here even a new simple date format is created. So a lot of object creation just to parse a date or to create a date. Our best practice is to use custom JAXB bindings to convert XML dates into Java dates. And there you can use either the JODA-time or the Java 8 local date time object. So if you create your own date converter with a parse date method and a print date method, you can then see that we do not have to create a date formatter every time. It can be reused. Once you have a converter like this, which uses the local date time object, you can apply this in the configuration file, where you specify in the binding that for an XML date type, you'll use the JODA local date time, and here you provide both the parse method and the print method. So this brings us to the key takeaway points of this presentation. You want to avoid XML processing if you can. If you have to use XML processing, then reduce the message size. Consider disabling the XML validation if not needed. Reuse expensive objects like the JAXBContext and the ObjectMapper. Avoid the XMLGregorianCalendar when you deal with dates. And note that the XML factories are expensive objects, so try to reuse them, but be aware that they're not thread safe. Thank you, and hope to see you in the next presentation.